Hello and welcome to the Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. This episode has support from no official sponsor, but from my very own The Blockchain and Us newsletter. Get an email from me every 2 weeks with a very short summary of new podcast episodes so you can immediately pick those interviews you'd like to listen to. To stay up to date, just visit www.theblockchainandus.com and sign up today. My guest today is Daniel Doll-Steinberg. Daniel is the CEO of Blockchain Smokers in London, where he helps companies embrace blockchain technology to achieve growth. He is a former banker in London and New York and a founder and co-founder of several companies, including the Atari Token, and he is also an active investor and mentor to technology companies. And now, to the interview. Hello, Daniel, and thanks a lot for making time for this interview.
Hi, Manuel. Thank you for asking me.
We met last year at a film screening of my blockchain film in London and have stayed in touch since. And back then, that whole blockchain discussion had just started to pick up in Europe. What have you been doing over the last year?
Well, the space is incredibly fast moving. I've tended to change from working 5 to 6 days a week into working 6 to 7 days a week. I don't think I get a day off. It's a very global space, so I travel enormously around the world. I've clocked up so many air miles. I'm sort of platinum American and silver BA, flying economy everywhere.
Okay.
And what I've noticed is the space is getting bigger and bigger, and you're meeting more and more people. So whereas when we met last, I think it was a relatively small group of people that were enthusiastic about the space and the real sort of innovators in the space doing things. I think there are more and more people coming on, and that's something that I've been welcoming. When we first met, one of the things I was doing was trying to encourage industrial players and successful serial entrepreneurs to move into the space, to work on the blockchain and to develop projects, because I felt that would move it outside the space that it was in, and also move it very, very quickly. The other thing I've seen is the speed has just increased, and the blockchain has started to create sub-innovations like the token sale, which is now becoming a potentially global fundraising mechanism for all types of companies and all types of assets. So I've seen that. I've also seen that a lot of the early companies into the space, in terms of the support companies, are now being replaced and enhanced by people with experience in those areas, and it's really welcoming to see that. When I look at this space, I'm reminded of the internet space, 20 odd years ago, but this is on double or triple speed. And the other thing that you tend to find is a lot of people in this space are very idealistic about what they want to achieve, and it's really refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same boat here. I mean, I've been in the .com boom 1.0, right? And there everybody had a business plan and everybody was, wanted to do something, but now this time around, a few years ago, it's just so much more professional, I feel, even, and everybody's on board. Back then it was still, at the very beginning, right, 95, 96, it was it just picked up very slowly, and here we went from 0 to 100 in 2 or 3 months, I feel.
Well, I think that's an element of where we are as societally in the West, particularly in the West. When the internet boom was starting, it was rare for someone to come straight out of college or university and found a firm. They were still going into the traditional enterprises and working for big companies, and then moving out into the space. It was rare for CEOs of large companies to jump ship and start or join a startup. I remember it was massive press. I think it was Webvan when the head of Arthur Anderson, I think it was at the time, of someone like that, left to join Webvan. It was like, this is front page news, because of the success of the internet and the social networking, and people see the success. And one of the things that I'm always fascinated by, and I always used to talk when I was advising people like the European Commission, etc., I always said, the way you create more entrepreneurs is show them success that they can relate to. So one of the things that you see is people, children of parents who are successful entrepreneurs are incredibly likely to become entrepreneurial because they see that success. And I think the internet has shown now, with the likes of Zuckerberg and, the Google guys, Page and Brin, that people can come out of college and create these incredible companies, that people do that. So what you're seeing in this space now is a lot of very young people who have just left college with very, very relevant skills and very, very fresh skills are trying it. And failure is not considered an issue, that they'll try it again and again. But the other thing you see, because the internet has shown this, is traditional people from traditional industry who've had careers in those industries are also made the leap into the internet. So this time around with the blockchain, you've already got in people's minds that new technology and fast innovation and fast growing markets are a perfectly acceptable way to build a career. And clearly that's made, and you can see that this time, the number of people you meet from both sides that are jumping into this space and being congratulated by people rather than looked at with horror is interesting. I mean, just to go back to my childhood, when I was 16, I was at a British public school, a very good British public school as it happened, one of the best. And I remember when I was 15, 16, and I was with one of my Sir Masters who I liked a lot, actually, a very good guy. And he asked me, because it was a careers day, what did I want to do when I left school? And I said, I'd eventually like to start a business like my father. And he looked at me sort of incredulously. He said, people don't do that. They go, you can become a lawyer or a politician or a doctor or a whatever, and so 30 years ago, it was frowned upon. In the internet time, it was rare. Now it's very common. If someone said to him, his equivalent today, I'm going to go and start a blockchain company, or I'm going to do something on my own, he'd be encouraged.
Mm-hmm. Right. Would be like, why haven't you done that yet? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a good point. And it's definitely something that's happening everywhere, I feel. For you, you're based in London, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Is it still a good place to be, like on the forefront of this trend? And I mean, are there many people coming through London or working out of London in this field?
Well, London is generally a very good place to locate a business. It's got a lot of huge advantages. One, it's time zone central. It speaks English. There are a lot of people from every country in the world, so getting people to speak other languages is very easy, and other cultures to understand those is very easy. It's democratic. Taxes are high, but not prohibitive. So people do come here, and it's got a lot of industry. It's got a lot of service industries around it, and a lot of management offices for other companies are based in London. So yes, however. The blockchain revolution is very global. And, when I used to go to internet type events, you would see, Western Europeans mainly and Americans. Now it's across the world, people from Asia, people from Russia, people from Ukraine, they're all in this space. And you're getting the best of the best all around the world. And I think, one of the things that I've noticed is whilst there is some concern about the blockchain and what it's going to do from authorities, there is also this race by some territories to adopt blockchain and have them, as a business that locates there. So you're seeing places like Gibraltar, you're seeing places like Singapore, you're seeing places like Moscow, which traditionally wouldn't be the place that people would choose first to start these businesses, but they're being started in those locations. And the other thing you see is the US historically had been the lead in innovation in the last, 30, 40 years. That is, whilst it's still very, very large there, it's not completely dominant. I mean, Tel Aviv, for instance, I was in Tel Aviv last week, and you see very much in Tel Aviv blockchain as a major a major innovation and a lot of skill sets going into that. And you'd expect it actually from Israel, all the security people and all the people with high tech skills, a lot of Russians, immigrants there too. That would be somewhere that you would expect that to come out of. I think the thing you've got to bear in mind here is also the cost of people. Because the skill set is so global, there is much more consideration of where you should locate your office based on the cost. And I think that's a great thing because rather than just automatically going for high expensive areas with expensive people, you're allowing very good people from different territories to earn significant amounts of money, and I think that's a real positive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I think it's a positive. Also, that those people who want to do something don't necessarily have to go to Silicon Valley, right, to get access to capital and to be in an entrepreneurial space. I mean, it used to be like that, but now it certainly has moved on. I mean, I'm based in Switzerland, and Switzerland has started to brand itself as this whole crypto valley place and wants to attract a lot of industry here. Have you looked at this place as well, or are you often in Switzerland?
I'm in Switzerland very, very often, less so for blockchain than other things, oddly enough. I like Switzerland a lot. When we first looked at where we were going to locate what we were doing, Switzerland was on the list and relatively high. We decided against it for a few reasons. Not the environment was not as good as other places. It just wasn't the place I wanted to set up this one.
Which reasons? Yeah. Which reasons were those?
I think the expense was one of them. I think the staffing in Switzerland is harder than in other places in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think the Swiss are very it's quite a regulated place, and we wanted someone that was slightly freer. But that was June last year. I mean, I think Switzerland has moved on a lot in that time. And if we were doing it again now, maybe we would have chosen what we were doing. And interestingly, the costs of the business of setting up these businesses has rocketed in the last year. I mean, multiplied by a factor of 10, I would say. So where the Swiss were looking expensive in those days, I suspect they're not looking nearly as expensive nowadays in terms of creation of the companies.
What are those costs? I'm wondering. I mean, is it legal compliance?
It's company incorporation. It's staffing for those companies, because if you create a company in a territory, you do want to eventually have a lot of staff there, and a head office there. I mean, often that's very difficult at the beginning with the blockchain, particularly because these companies start very small, and then they grow big, so it comes slightly later. That was one of them. I think the legal costs were very, very large there, and the time to create the companies were much longer than in other territories in terms of the legal work, and also because Switzerland was so popular in May, June, July, August last year, the legal firms hadn't been able to build up skills quickly enough, and so their lead time into the work was very, very long, which meant that the thing I think about, what have I noticed about this space in the last year? You asked me that at the beginning. I think the other thing I've realized too is whilst we're all in a hurry to do things, actually you always have more time than you think. So looking back on the last year, those things that seemed too long for us to make a decision based on that, it was possibly should not have been a criterion of the choice at the time. So what I'm saying about Switzerland is I think what they're doing is very positive, and I would, the decisions I made about Switzerland last year are not necessarily the same decisions I would have made this year. I mean, I'm not saying the decision we made, we've actually located in Gibraltar. I'm extremely happy with that decision. But the criteria with which I would have made that decision if I made it today would be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely understand. I mean, I hear similar things from many people, to be honest. Those entrepreneurs who are already here, who are Swiss, of course, they enjoy being here and they want to stay here. But many others look further and they look into other jurisdictions to start something. Was that when you set up you set up in Gibraltar, was that with blockchain smokers?
No, that was with the Atari project.
Right. I want to get into that in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, the Blockchain Smokers product is a UK company.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not it doesn't require the sort of legals and regulations that what we're doing with Atari requires. It's more of an advisory consultancy service. So Blockchain Smokers I created in early 2017, having learned about the blockchain in mid 2016. I started learning about the blockchain and I was fascinated by it, and I really wanted to get involved. So the way I did that was to join forces with 3 other people. In fact, it was 4 at the beginning and they became 3, who were from different backgrounds. One ran an accelerator, one was a blockchain guru, triple PhD, and advised a lot of the big blockchain platforms and understood the maths behind it. And a guy from IBM 2 guys from IBM, one ex, one existing, who really understood, I felt, the practical implications of the blockchain industry. And Blockchain Smokers was there to infuse people about the blockchain, why you should get into the blockchain, and try and bring industry players in. And we started that process quite well. There are several companies that I can see nowadays. I was with one recently that we did encourage to get into the blockchain, and they're doing incredibly well. But what we were doing with that company sort of has been put on hold because of what I'm doing in other spaces at the moment. But I do have the intention of continuing that journey. Maybe as Blockchain Smokers, maybe as something else. I mean, I still, when I talk at events, I've only talked probably 3 times under the banner Atari. Or its project name. I probably talked twice under its project name. It had a project name previously to that. I'm almost always talking as Blockchain Smokers, and the reason I do that is I feel that's not at all partisan. That's very, I just talk about the blockchain as someone that's not trying to sell anything, not with a specific self-interest. It's apart from the fact that I think people should be in the blockchain, and so I use that I still use that email address a lot because I use it when I'm talking about blockchain in general and what it can do.
It's such a good name. I mean, I'm sure that's also a reason to keep using that email address.
Yeah. I love that. I love that name, and it's a funny name because we only sort of came up with it in May. Funnily enough, we were working without a name for many months, and we needed a name in May last year, and no one could come up with a name. And I happened to be my daughter had just told me she'd booked tickets to see the Chainsmokers, and it just struck me that Blockchain Smokers was just such a cool name.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit later more about the projects you did there. But first, I want to get into the Atari Token. How did you get involved? I saw you were a co-founder of the project. How did you get involved with it?
Well, funnily enough, I got involved via blockchain smokers. So my thesis for blockchain smokers from late 2016 was to bring industry players into the blockchain. I really wanted people that understood their industry, had existing technology that they were using in the industry, and understanding the people in the industry and how you integrate into that industry. It's no good building the best product in the world. And I've done that with a few companies I've been involved with. They're not the best products in the world, but phenomenal products for their industry, but the industry just won't take it up. It's just, you don't have the mechanism, the understanding of that industry for them to pick it up and use it. So that's a death knell to a product. So Blockchain Smokers was all about taking people that understood their industries, converting what they did to the blockchain and understanding what its use case was. So its use case probably wasn't what they were currently doing. And then having industry players insert that blockchain into the industry with the understanding. So what I did in early 2017 is to understand the process. I took one of my very early companies, one of the first companies I founded that had some really groundbreaking technology in the entertainment space. It was one of the very first companies that ever delivered activation keys around the world. When you buy a product like Norton Antivirus or Microsoft Office, it says, please enter your code, that 16-digit alphanumerical code. So in the old days, that was printed on a disk, or printed inside the box, and you would type it in. We were the first company that started delivering those codes electronically to people. So, rather than put them in boxes. So it was a great innovation at the time. Other people started doing it around the same time, but we were one of the very first, and we have a lot of, but we changed an industry with that. So, but that was a tech that the people in it understood their industry. It was a great technology. They had a history of innovation and selling the innovations into big companies. So I took 4 people out of the company and I asked them to build that tech in blockchain, just a proof of concept, and they built one. And in May last year, I started learning about token sales, and they fascinated me. Token sales really fascinated. My background is derivative trading technology, so I really like innovations in finance and the global innovations in finance, and so the token sale really struck me as a separate innovation to blockchain. It needs the blockchain to do it, I suspect, but it's a separate innovation, and I loved it. So I asked the team to start writing what you would need to do a token sale. Again, I was trying to learn the space. Approximately the same time, I reconnected with a very old friend of mine. In fact, he's my oldest friend. I've known him since I was 3. But I haven't seen him very much in the last 15 years. Maybe we speak on birthdays or send each other texts, but I hadn't seen him. And he went to Dallas in the early 90s and started building computer gaming companies. So he was involved in the very early flight simulators. Then he went into first-person shooters, and Medal of Honor came out of a team he created or worked with, or which became Call of Duty. And then he discovered that he was one of the first 3 companies that discovered the casual gaming industry and built an enormous company with casual gaming. I think one of his games was downloaded 100 million times in the first month.
Wow. Cool.
He was a real. Funnily enough, he never made a big name for himself, in the industry. So people in the industry all know him, but outside the industry, he's not like John Carmack or whatever, but he's friends with all those guys. But someone that understands gaming more than almost anybody else in the world. And I was talking to him about blockchain about the same time I was doing this. And I was telling him what I was doing. He hadn't heard of the blockchain. And it was what Blockchain Smokers was supposed to do. So I told him about the tech that we were converting to the blockchain. And he went away and thought about it for a while and came back to me and said, what you are creating here is something that I have been working on he has been working on for the last 6 years, which was a new way of creating economies within games. So a new monetization engine for gaming, the next generation of app stores. And the blockchain allowed you to do it. So what we did is we merged his company and my company. Atari, we then built a board of directors. We have a very eminent group of gaming guys, and one of them is the CEO of Atari. And when he joined, when he joined as a director and understood the enormous potential that this product has, he asked if we would become the Atari platform and the Atari Token. And now there are 4 co-founders of the business. There's my Ron and his gaming side. There's myself and my global platform side and content management side. Mm-hmm. There's Atari, and there's now a guy called Anthony Diorio. He's the 4th honorary co-founder. He's one of the founders of Ethereum. Mm-hmm. He joined us very recently. So we now have this phenomenal. It's what Blockchain Smokers was there to do. Funnily enough, it was there to get people that understood the industry, people that understood the blockchain. And we have one of the Blockchain Smokers guy, Anish Mohammed, who's this mathematician, understands the deep workings of the blockchain. He's also involved. So we have this strong Anthony and Anish blockchain skills, and the guys that were building the proof of concept for us in blockchain, they're involved. We have the incredible understanding of the games industry and what it needs to deliver. We have an incredible understanding of global platforms, security, managing assets, and we have Atari as the brand. And that's really what Blockchain Smokers was there to create.
Yeah, cool. I think there's a lot of interest from, you said a brand, right? Established brands or established companies to use this technology for their internal processes first, but also to create new products. I mean, I just had interviews with insurance companies, and I mean, almost all of them have some kind of contracts that they're trying, right, to solve with smart contracts. And I think it's really promising. When speaking of the brand, right, I mean, of course, you've seen this whole Kodak coin, right? And I read this article in Forbes about the Atari token where a guy wrote, this seems, and I quote here, "This seems like a way to attach a well-known name to a popular trend in order to generate interest and perhaps boost the fortunes of a fading company." And he was talking about Atari. So I'm sure that's something you hear quite a lot. But what do you respond when somebody comes to you with this?
Well, we heard it quite a lot in February. We don't hear it much anymore. The reason that happened, I think it's more interesting to talk about why that happened, is Kodak was in all the news at the moment. They were the first company to jump in. I don't really want to talk about what Kodak are doing because it doesn't fit with what my vision is for this space. But they have their own plans, and it's not what I would do. Let's suffice to say what they've done is not what I would do. But I think what we're doing is very different. And the reason these articles came around is because we were running under a code name since June last year. It was called Project Virtue. So we had a code name. We weren't announcing that we were Atari. We weren't intending to announce that we were Atari till much further down the road, probably a bit after we are today. So we wanted to build a proper product, a proper team, a proper, package. We wanted to be quite well financed before we did that. And we wanted to tell our story. And our story is a very powerful story. What unfortunately happened, I mean, it's unfortunate. Press is never bad. So let me say I'm pleased that we had 300 pieces of press or thereabouts, including Telegraph. You mentioned Forbes, there was Fortune, there was Bloomberg, even Rolling Stone magazine covered it. In fact, the Rolling Stone magazine was very positive, actually. But the reason it happened is Atari are a shareholder in this company. It's a brand new company. Atari shareholder, and the CEO of Atari is a director of the company. But because Atari owned an equity holding, and Atari are a publicly listed company in France and therefore have to obey the rules of the stock exchange, they felt obliged. And I say feel obliged because I didn't look into the regulations myself, but they felt obliged under French regulations to announce the completion of the deal. So the deal was signed, but it took a long time to execute because we were trying to build all the pieces before the deal was finally executed. As I said, we've been planning this for, unlike most ICOs, including the ones you've been talking about, which are sort of created and then do a token sale 6 weeks later. We haven't done that. We just take 10 months. But because Atari issued a regulatory filing in February in French to the stock exchange, it got picked up. I think it was Bloomberg that picked it up first, and they wrote about it. But because it just said Atari have acquired a piece of this company, and the company is going to do the Atari token, and that was pretty much all they said. There was no information. So the closest that anybody could get to what we were doing in February was what Kodak were doing. Mm-hmm. So we were labeled with the Kodak analogy, but I think that's not the correct analogy. The correct analogy is more like what Blockchain Smokers was trying to do, which is it's taking industry experts, and let's face it, Atari and the CEO of Atari are industry experts. And Ron, me, and Anthony are experts in our fields, and creator. You see, the point about blockchain, and when you talk about big companies looking at the blockchain, the fear I always have with big companies and disruptive innovation is they don't actually embrace it. They pretend to, or they try to, or the CEO has some vision, that they should be doing this, and puts a team on board. It's a 50,000 person company. They put a team of 50 on it or 30. That team gets lost and the CEO loses interest, or they find that to deliver the product damages their existing business. And, there is this period in which case they've got to suffer enormous losses and industry upheaval to get to where they want to be, that they find it very difficult to do that. I think in the case that we've got, where we were able to merge all these teams from these companies without damaging the existing companies, and do something brand new, means that we're very free. And it's entrepreneurs. The co-founders are 4 entrepreneurs who have successful careers in being entrepreneurs. Anthony has created a lot of companies. He founded Ethereum. Ron has founded 7 or 8 at least game companies, many of which are incredibly successful. I've founded 5 or 6 companies, and Fred at Atari has financed and run several companies. And is now took Atari and runs it as a very entrepreneurial organization, free for the first time in many, many years, free of a major company. I mean, Atari's always been since the 80s. It's been embedded in large game companies, from Hasbro to Warner's to Infogram. They've all owned it as a subsidiary to use its name. This is the first time since it was founded that you've got someone that's running it as an independent entity and trying to do really good things with it. He's not trying to just put the label on various digital items. He's actually trying to create new things. He's got the Atari console coming out, and this really is, the way I look at it. And I look at the fact that Atari was created in 72. In 1977, it created the VCS, and that brought gaming into the real world. I mean, it was a phenomenon, and it created. It was the first console that everybody played. And in 2017, when we created the Atari Token, 40 years later, we're rebooting Atari, and I like the expression rebooting Atari because you reboot hardware, and we're bringing the real world back into gaming. So I think we're very different.
Right, different than Kodak and other offerings.
Different from a lot of ICOs. Either most token sales are either people that understand the blockchain very, very, very well and are trying to create either platforms, which they'll probably be good at, or industrial solutions, which the jury's still out on, or it's people that don't really understand the blockchain but think it's a good idea, just to put the name on it to see what they can do.
Yeah, I see. What can you already talk about what the token will do? Let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. This episode has support from no official sponsor, but from my very own The Blockchain and Us newsletter. Get an email from me every 2 weeks with a very short summary of new podcast episodes so you can immediately pick those interviews you'd like to listen to. To stay up to date, just visit www.theblockchainandus.com and sign up today. Can you already talk about what the token will do?
No, we don't talk about the Atari token. We have a very regulated process. We're trying to make sure that we're as regulated as possible in terms of following existing laws. So we have a very defined process, and unfortunately that requires a non-disclosure agreement at the moment before we do it, and we do that for a number of reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, we don't. But in the sort of headline of what we're doing is we're creating the next generation platform for the next generation of gaming, and the next generation of gaming is what I dub alternate realities, any multiplayer game where people interact with each other. We're building the platform for that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You already mentioned, the legal framework and the NDA and all those things you had to observe. In general, how do you approach this? Because the regulation seems to be somewhat uncertain how to deal with ICOs still all around the world. And I wonder how people who are very active in this space kind of hedge against that legal risk.
Well, that's a really good and difficult question to ask, but it's also a very difficult question to answer. I've been Fun enough, I've been talking about ICOs on panels and presentations since May last year, and I still consider myself to be a novice in this space. But I don't think there are any experts yet. There is only opinion. The way that we've done it is I have been pretty much, as I said at the beginning, on a plane since May last year. I'm fortunately in London for the day today, but I came back late last night and I leave again tomorrow. My wife is smiling. She smiled earlier and said, "Why did you even bother coming home?" I said I was on two sides of the world. Like London was in the middle. I've just been learning. My co-founder and I, and my gaming co-founder, and the team that I've got, we've got a team of 16 people, excluding board members and founders, that all they're doing is learning about this space. And it's a really interesting space. There is so much knowledge in this space, and there's so much learning. Every day I learn something new, and every week I learn something that makes me question the way I'm doing things.
That's a really good
point.
Thing. Yeah,
that's a really good. And I walk out, having a 5-minute chat with someone or a meeting. It can be formal, it can be informal, and going, "Oh, what they're doing is really great. What they've thought of, or the question they've asked me, or the concern they've asked me, that's a really valid point." And it questions, and I think that questioning is very good. So I think there are a number of ways of doing this. Firstly, you have to choose a jurisdiction that is very favorable about blockchain, but is also a jurisdiction that has democracy, proper rule of law, proper business practices, proper regulation of normal companies. And there aren't that many of those, actually, that you can point to. Then you've got to create a structure around the company that has a very well represented and proven financial management side of it. How are you going to, people can be raising a lot of money in this space. How have you had any experience in raising that sort of money before, and managing that sort of money before? If you have successfully, that's important, because that shows to the people that look at it, be they, people that are buying your tokens, be it the regulators, be it your directors, that you can do it. Then I think you need to create a very strong board of people with serious reputations, not people that are just being paid for doing a job, people with serious reputations that are putting their name, a director in a respected jurisdiction has legal responsibilities, and if he flouts those legal responsibilities, it can be a criminal act. It's certainly that is important, because once you've created that, you're showing to the outside world that we're doing that the company itself is a properly regulated company. I think that's very important to do that. The second thing is you then look at what the regulators say in each country, and you have examples like Gibraltar and Switzerland, maybe Singapore. I'm not so familiar with that, but I hear that they've laid out in very specific detail what you can and can't do. And if you locate yourself in one of those territories and you follow their regulations and their rules, regulations may be a bit strong still, but certainly their rules, then you have some surety in what you're doing. And the second and the final thing is if you enter those spaces where the regulators are concerned about this space and haven't told you what to do, then you either avoid that territory if you can, though that's got its problems that I'll explain, or you read up on every single regulation that's around that space, and for traditional investment, and you make sure you follow that. And that, I think, is as safe as you can do. And that's the process that we've been followed. In terms of I brushed on that point about missing out territories. The problem with missing out territories is if you're going to be building a global product and your product is based on a tokenized model, and you've excluded enormous territories, for instance, China, the US, for sake of argument, which are the two most valuable markets in the world. I think if you add up their GDP, it's bigger than all the others added together. How do you enter that market ever? Because you might not be able to, which means you've immediately excluded your two biggest markets from your eventual product. So it is a very difficult space, which is why you can't answer it. And then the other thing I've done is I've talked to a lot of, and I get close to a lot of the big token sales that I think did it well, in my view. And I either know their chief investment officer or I know their CEO, and we talk regularly. And one of the things that they do, and we will probably do, is talk in detail to the regulators. We will not do a crowd sale, the ICO, what people generally implies an ICO, which is the crowd sale, until we're confident that we meet the rules that the regulators set down or has told us.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. You mentioned before that you often meet with the teams in the successful ICOs that and just kind of exchange opinions and things you've seen and observed. How, in your experience, what separates such a company that is running a good ICO, let's say, from one that has maybe little chance of doing things right?
There are two ways we assess that. Three ways, actually. One, we either meet them in an event, or we're introduced to them, and we talk to them for a while and assess that what they're doing is proper, and we will find information that they don't make public because we're not buyers. They will talk about their most buyers aren't interested in the process they follow. We're interested in the process they follow. That's the first way. The second is where we use legal firms, or we know legal firms very well, and they're clients of theirs. So we're attracted. The law firms that we use only take clients on that they consider to be following the proper rules. They push the boundaries slightly, as you have to in the space, but they're very conservative. So that's the third. And the third way I've done it is by, I found some ICOs which I really like the look of. I think they've done it really well. They're quite big, and I happen to know someone that's part of the team. Like there's one, I won't mention the name of them because it's inappropriate to say who I think is good and who I think is bad. There's one who I happen to be a family friend of mine was their chief investment officer. So, when I found that out, I could go and talk to him and we could have a chat about what they were doing. Yeah. And that was the third way I did it.
Right. It's a small world still, right? Just as the jurisdictions that you mentioned, I mean, Gibraltar, Switzerland, Malta, those are all small jurisdictions. That means you can go and almost have lunch with the regulator. And I think it's very similar with all the big players in this field.
Well, it's right. It's right. It's also some of those jurisdictions. I mean, Gibraltar, for instance, we've already done it. You meet the ministers that are in charge of this area. And before we chose Gibraltar, I mean, I met with him and I talked to him, and I wanted to understand what they were doing. And they give you confidence. We're seeing them next week in New York at a dinner. Because we're very heavily invested in Gibraltar. I don't mean that we put money in, but we're invested, so our future is invested in Gibraltar. We meet them and we discuss, and you want to know those things. And I agree that it makes it, if you want to try and meet a minister in the UK or a US, a government official, it'd be very, very, very difficult. But in these spaces, it's much easier. Yes.
When you look at the entrepreneurs who run, the successful crypto or blockchain companies, what are characteristics that you observe with them?
What, of the CEOs?
Of the CEOs, of the founders?
I think they're very similar to most entrepreneurs. They now, previously, if you'd asked me that question in June, July, August last year, I would say they're very young. They came out of university. They understand maths. They understand the blockchain. They'd worked a lot of them had worked in blockchain companies that were looking at the blockchain. They'd done it at college or university. I think what you're seeing now is it's much more entrepreneurs who are just generally serial entrepreneurs, because if you're an entrepreneur with one company behind you, you tend not to jump and do another one. So these are serial entrepreneurs. I think a lot of them are quite idealistic. They're very keen for the world to be better for those people that find the current world tough, people that find it difficult to get on the property ladder, people that are unbanked, people that live in regimes where which are undemocratic. I think those, and that's a lot of people. I mean, those two, the unbanked and the people living undemocratic, I think they really want to do something good. I think it's moved from this, 4 or 5 years ago, this sort of slightly destructive nature of the business, where it was, we want to replace the old. I think, what you're seeing now is you don't want to replace the old, you just want to make it better for the rest. And that's a really great thing. And I like that. So those are the type of people you see. And the final set you see, and this is what Blockchain Smokers did, when we were doing that, and the companies, those that I met through that, they're people whose product is improved enormously by the blockchain. So content management systems, some construction management software, luxury good product, that manage luxury goods. those products are so obviously improved by this technology that those entrepreneurs that learn about it, and that's what Blockchain Smokers did. We used to teach these entrepreneurs about the tech and try and convince them that the blockchain was good. They would then come back to us and say, "Oh, I understand what you're saying. If I build, if I do this, I can do all these things." I think that those are the final set of entrepreneurs I see.
Yeah, cool. Speaking of that, when you said you wanted to bring more traditional entrepreneurs or businesses onto the blockchain, into the blockchain space and work with it and explore it, what should maybe more traditional companies and also investors in the crypto and blockchain space understand better?
They need to think of two things. One is my view. One is that the blockchain is very early tech. It's the products they can build today are going to be very different from the products they can build in 10 years. And they've got to be able to manage that process. So the first company I built, and I'm sure it'll make you smile now, you probably haven't even used one. It was for content management distribution. And the reason we came up with delivering live activation keys rather than anything else around the world is some of our clients were still on 14.4K modems, which would dial up, and they couldn't receive much data. So the technology we needed to build in those days was completely different from what that company does now, where you've got gigabit Ethernet, around the world, and fiber, So you've got to be able to plan a product based on what exists today, and not believe what the blockchain's vision is in the future, as the only reason you're involved in this space. So that's really important. But the second thing you've got to, I don't think the real excitement is going to come from people saying, "I've got this business that is a logistics business, and I'm just going to stick it on the blockchain, and it's going to do pretty much the same thing it's doing today." For me, the excitements are projects like my Atari one. I mean, Atari one would be one, because otherwise I wouldn't be involved in it. So it's not like I'm selling my own product. It's just, that's where I'm excited. It's where they take existing technology and existing expertise. They say, this is what the blockchain can do. What does that create? And it doesn't actually create necessarily anything like the existing technologies. It's just the existing technologies are the base. So they do something completely different. So before, the internet, when the internet was created, people just downloaded, pictures and, they sent emails around. And then you got the first generation of companies was searching, because you started getting a lot of information. Then you got some e-commerce platforms. It was only later that you got Web 2.0 and social networking and things like that. Social networking was much more exciting to me than, even with all its issues, was an exciting innovation than putting a shop online, because, that was something that could never have been done before. There was mail order before there was Amazon. It's just Amazon was incredibly efficient at it. And it's an amazing, Amazon has become much more than that. But it's when it's these ideas that come around in the second generation where people are saying, wow, because we've got this, we can do something that people have never done before. And that's what I try to look at.
That's quite a leap, though, sometimes, right? I mean, I'm sure that many companies who got on board with the internet very early on couldn't imagine. I mean, certainly, I and everybody I know couldn't imagine that there would be social media at some point. And so it's maybe more a cultural thing with the companies to drive more some, emergent strategies and see that they can adapt to new things as they happen.
Yes, it's often innovation is never, disruptive innovation is rarely a single step. It's very often multiple steps. I think what you're seeing now is because we're working so fast in this space. I think that there are some of those companies already coming out. I think 2 years of blockchain is like 10 years of internet, in terms of, because there is so much brain power in this space and so much enthusiasm for it. and the financing mechanisms are so exciting. The fact that people are able to raise these sort of monies is very, very interesting. Does that mean that there's going to be a greater success rate of companies compared to the internet revolution? No, doesn't mean that at all. I just think the speed at which those companies are being created is faster.
Cool. For you, as an entrepreneur yourself, who are your role models?
Oh, in the space or outside the space?
Just in general, maybe starting with when you launched your first company and then moved into this new space.
I guess it would be my father and father-in-law were probably my role models. If I was going to be very insular about it, I mean, anyone. Obviously, I have great respect for the likes of Bill Gates, who obviously were, when I was young, they were the entrepreneurs of my time. I mean, now I guess it would be people like Elon Musk. These are great visionaries. But no, I think it's much closer to home. My father was a phenomenal entrepreneur, and so is my father-in-law, and they have very different backgrounds. In fact, they have very similar backgrounds, but very different educations and early lives in terms of academics, and went on to do incredibly great things. And I think that's been one of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, that's been one of the things that I've told authorities about, European Commission, British government, to encourage people to be entrepreneurs. You need to encourage them to think they can be like. You've got to find people that they think they can be like. Now, as much as I think highly of myself, and I have to think highly of myself, otherwise I'd never do this, I don't see myself as an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates. They're just on a completely different level. I can't even recognize that sort of third person in me. But I can recognize my father and my father-in-law in me, and they're people that I can see and I could talk to. So I guess it was those.
Yeah, it's maybe much more important to have real people that you can emulate than just idols, right? That are hard to reach.
I think it's much more real. It's much more real. So I think it's a little like, just to talk on that analogy a little more. I always used to equate it to football. Soccer, football. And sport, most people can see that there's a footballer. Most people that have from backgrounds where they don't have entrepreneurs can see that there's a footballer that came out of their town, came out of their village, and went on to great superstardom. And therefore, people can see themselves as that sort of person. Most people can't see themselves as the Bill Gateses or the Elon Musks of the world. And I think that's one of the disinhibitors from people wanting to become an entrepreneur, and why so many people want to become sportsmen, because they can see people like themselves have achieved those sort of heights. I mean, the chance of it happening are just as low. They just can associate with those figures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a very good point. What's next for you in the coming months?
We continue to work on Atari. That's really the big focus for us. Mm-hmm. We're starting to build product now. We have a very aggressive development cycle coming up. We've completed our very, very first round. We called it a founder round. Again, an unusual, not a standard token sale type of round, but then none of our rounds are similar to what's generally happened in this space. But yeah, it's very much it's working on it's working on that foundation, improving it, raising our what is generically called a pre-sale, but we have two more rounds coming up that are very private and institutional rounds, and building out product and learning. There are, as I said, there are 4 co-founders of the business, 2 that are very executive, 2 that are one that's medium and one that's not executive at all. But we have 2 executive founders, myself and Ron, my old friend, and he's responsible for building the product, he'll be the CEO, and he'll really run the project and the team that is now growing very fast. But my role will be much more to continue to find companies in the space that have product that we can learn from, or we can work with, or we can help grow to help us create a very large platform. So I'll continue to do what I'm doing at the moment, which is going to events, meeting people, just meeting everyone that we can to try and understand what is going on in this space and how we can best use what's going on in the space to improve our success, and also the success of the space itself. There are a lot of challenges that we have in the blockchain, and they're the biggest challenges that we have in the blockchain that we cannot solve by ourselves. Those are technical challenges. For instance, the use of and the speed and the scalability of the blockchain itself. That's clearly one of them. And the second are the I use the word very loosely, but the regulatory side. How do we, as these tokenized models become pervasive, how do you operate a tokenized model? What are the requirements for using it? What are the taxation models on it? What are the anti-fraud models on it? What are the anti-gambling regulations? What are the banking regulations? These are going to be challenges that everybody in this space is going to find themselves having to deal with as the space becomes bigger, especially if tokens can be exchanged for other tokens, or which is a necessity in these models, or to exchange for cash, or cash is put into the tokenized economy. Those are the type of things that where I will spend my time to make sure that we're working with similar sized companies and people with a similar outlook to us to try and ensure that those matters are resolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To allow the industry to grow.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Do you think we're more maybe on the side of underestimating what this technology can do, or is it maybe more a matter of becoming more realistic in coming years? What has been possible?
I think another fantastic question. I think the question to that is both. So I think there are many people in this space that are expecting very quick results and world-changing results in the very, very short term, and I think that's not likely to happen on the scale of likeliness. That's on the very, very unlikely. It could happen, but I personally would fall on the unlikely side. If you're looking outside the space, and let's face it, 95% of the people in the world haven't heard of the blockchain. If you take the 6 billion or 7 billion of us, and even when you're talking about the developed world, you're probably talking about, less than 30% really know about it. And of those, maybe 5% have some reasonable understanding of it, and only 0.5% have deep understanding of it. I mean, it's so fractional. I think that is the massive change, and it's the argument about whether Bitcoin is going to be valuable or not valuable. Is it so few people use those sort of cryptocurrencies and have access to it. If the majority of the world does, of course, it's going to be valuable. But also that we look at things always through our own echo chamber. And the thing I wanted to solve in the blockchain with blockchain smokers was to break outside that echo chamber of the same people for the last 2 years talking about the same things. The more people you bring in, the more echo chamber. And that's the same thing with the cryptocurrency. I look at cryptocurrency in one way. All my friends and colleagues look at it in a completely different way, which it's got no value to them. They say, well, why would you bother having an asset? We can buy gold, we can buy houses. But there are 2 billion people that are unbanked in the world. Mm-hmm. If you look through their eyes, cryptocurrency is life-changing. There are several billion people living in dictatorships or in family or in societies where they're discriminated against either because they're a woman or because of something religious or something racial. Though in those societies, owning a currency like a cryptocurrency is phenomenally important to those people, and we can't see it. And that's so. To try and answer your second question, I think the final manifestation and development and products that come out of the blockchain are greater than we can ever think. But what happens in the short term is probably less than we think.
Cool. That's great. Thanks so much. Thanks a lot, Daniel, and really appreciate your taking time today.
Thank you, Manuel, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guest and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.